Welcome back, everybody. In part two of equivalent fractions, we are going to continue working to answer the question, what strategies can you use to find equivalent fractions? In part one, we talked about using benchmark fractions and number lines to find out if fractions were greater than, less than, or equal to another. And we used symbols like less than, greater than, and equal to. And now what we're going to move into is finding a common denominator when the denominators are different, okay? And that's an important vocabulary word to write down on your organizer, is common denominator, and more specifically, the lowest common denominator. Many times you'll actually hear it known by LCD, especially when you get into middle school and in fifth grade as well, okay? So we are going to look at fractions where the denominators are different. So for example, I might have 1/3 and 3/4, and I need to try to figure out if 1/3 is less than, greater than, or equal to 3/4. But it's tricky because the denominators are different as well as the numerators are different. So in our model problem part of the organizer, I'm going to look at, in fact, 1/3 and 3/4 and try to figure out if it's greater than, less than, or equal to the other fraction. Now, what my goal is when I find a common denominator is to make the denominators the same so that the fractions have the denominators in common with one another. And that's why they use the term common denominator or lowest common denominator. Now, the way I'm going to do that is by actually creating equivalent fractions, which we've done really for the last week or so. But I'm going to use the T-chart that you see right down here, okay? Now, make sure you pause because the steps can be a little bit confusing, so please pause, rewind, and especially ask questions when you get into class tomorrow. So I'll try a different color here, and I'm going to write 3, the denominator that I used right here on the T-chart, and I'm going to put 4 down here. And now I'm thinking multiples, all right? So as I find multiples of 3 and multiples of 4, I'm going to be examining the T-chart to see where they have a multiple in common. So I might start off here and say 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, okay? And I'm going to go down the list as well here and say 4, 8, 12, oh, they have one in common, because the lowest multiple that they have in common, or the lowest denominator, or the smallest denominator they have in common, is 12. So what that's going to show me is that my denominator for both fractions is going to be 12. So let's get rid of that arrow here briefly and show you what I'm going to do. I'm going to actually just make an equivalent fraction. 12 and 12. Now, once again, I got the 12s from the T-chart down here because it's a multiple or a denominator that they'll have in common. Now, creating equivalent fractions is no different than how we learned it in the beginning. And if you want just to review, we have the videos on equivalent fractions that you can look at. So I'm going to figure out how I can get to 12, and I'm going to say 3. I know that 3 times 4 can give me 12. And whatever I do to the denominator, I've really got to do to the numerator. I know that 1 times 4 equals 4. So far I have 4 12ths. And I'm going to do the same thing over here and say 4 times 3 can get me to 12, and 3 times 3 can get me to 9, okay? So now, instead of comparing 3/4 and 1/3, I'm actually going to be comparing 4 12ths and 9 12ths. So all of a sudden, now that my denominators are the same, this fraction is much easier to compare, okay? And so by looking at the numerators, I know that 4 is smaller than 9, so 4/12 is less than 9/12. So for practice problem 1, what I'd like you to do is to pause, and I'd like you to solve this on the organizer. Use the T-chart that's down here and compare 2/5 and 1/3. Once you've solved it, then please go ahead, push play, and then you'll see my solution. So, welcome back. Hope everything went well. Now what you're going to see is I found 2/5 and 1/3. I took the denominator, 5 and 3, and I wanted to find a common denominator, or the lowest common denominator, and I put 5 and 3 right over here, as you can see what my laser pointer is doing. I went ahead and I found the multiples of both 5 and 3, and I figured out which was the lowest multiple that they had in common, okay? And I knew that was 15, and that meant that 15 became my new denominators. So 6/15 is the equivalent fraction I used for 2/5, and 5/15 is the equivalent fraction I used for 1/3. And as you can see from the arrows, 6/15 and 5/15 are now the fractions that I'm comparing, but because they're equivalent fractions, they are the same as what I started with, okay? Let me just move the camera over. So, we're going to move on to practice problem 2 and 3 right away. For practice problem 2, you're going to compare 1/2 and 3/5, I'm sorry, so 1/2 and 3/5. Do not forget to use the T-chart down here to show all your math thinking. And for practice problem 3, you're going to be comparing 7/8 and 5/6. Please be sure to use the T-chart below on your organizer to show all your math thinking. So just to review, in this part 2 video of equivalent fractions, we continue to answer the question, what strategies can we use to find or to compare fractions? So good luck, ask questions when you get into class, and look forward to seeing what you can do.